Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be upcycling a pair of jeans into a denim apron. And you can do this project with any pair of jeans or pants. It's super easy to do, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, let's get started. For this project, you'll need one pair of pants, and you can use any style of pants. I'm using a pair of denim jeans that's on the thicker side because I want this apron to turn out a little bit more heavy duty. I also found a pair that has a double stitch inseam. This is going to come in handy once we start making the pockets and building the top section. But like I said, any pair of pants will work. It really comes down to what you want your apron to look like. Moving on to preparing the pants, the first thing we're going to do is measure down about 4 to 5 inches on the inseam from the center seam. You want to give yourself enough room because we're going to be utilizing the pant legs as extra fabric to make the top section and the pockets. And 4 to 5 inches down worked really well for me. Go ahead and make your cuts, and for the next step we don't need the pant legs, so for the moment we can place them off to the side. From here we're going to move to where we just cut and dethread the entire inseam. And you don't want to cut it because we're actually going to be reusing that seam, so try to make it as neat as possible. It may take a little bit longer, but it's well worth it. Next we're going to move to the side seams, and for this step you can use scissors. We're going to cut down the side seam on the opposite side of the rivet. We're trying to keep that rivet intact so we can use it within the design. You also want to make the cut about 1/2 inch away from the side seam. This will give you enough space to hem the edge in future steps. Separate the front and back panel with right sides facing up. Starting with the back panel, we're going to dethread the center seam up to the center of the pockets. The goal is to overlap these panels and have them sit flat, so if you need to go a little bit higher, that's totally fine. For the bottom edge of the seam, you want to fold it under so you have a clean edge, and then place a few pins. Then we're going to move over to the front panel and dethread the center seam up to the bottom of the fly. And we're essentially doing the same thing. We're dethreading so we can overlap the two sides so the panel sits flat. Just like with the back panel, place a few pins. And when it comes to stitching, we're actually going to be stitching directly in the old stitch paths. These seams are double stitched, so I'm going to place a stitch in each one of the stitch paths. I also recommend matching the thread color to what's already on your pants, so that way it blends in nicely. And it doesn't have to be an exact match, anything close looks pretty good. And I did only do one stitch on the bottom section of the back panel, but feel free to do 2 to match the top. Also, don't worry if there's a small gap along the bottom edge, we'll actually be taking care of this in future steps. You mainly just want to make sure both of these panels are sitting as flat as possible. This next step is optional, and what I'm going to be doing is cleaning up the raw edges on the sides, just to make it look a little bit nicer once everything is sewn together. When it comes to the front panel, this step can be a little bit tricky because there's the actual seam and then a lot of other bulkier areas. So what I'm going to be doing is using a serger and just serging each one of those sides. And no worries if you don't have a serger, you can also use a zigzag stitch and just go right along the edge. Just use a heavier weight needle and take your time going over the bulkier areas. And like I said before, this step is optional, but I'm just trying to make it as nice as possible just in case you're trying to sell it. But anyways, moving on to the next step, and for this next step, we don't need the back panel section, so we can place that off to the side and focus on the front panel section. What we're going to be doing is hemming the sides by folding directly on the side seam. This is why we offset the cut in previous steps, so that way we have a little bit of fabric to work with. Also, before you start stitching, be sure the pocket panel fabric is out of the way. Once you have both sides folded under and all your pins in place, add your top stitch. I also jumped over my rivet because it was directly in my stitch path, so just look out for that so you don't break a needle. And after finishing up the stitch, you'll see that the sides are nice and cleaned with serged backs. From here, we can grab the back section and move on to the next step. We'll be sewing these two panels together along the bottom edge, so place the wrong side of the back panel to the right side of the front panel, lining both of them up along the center seam. As you can see, they don't line up perfectly and the back panel has a slight angle. It's also a little bit longer than the front panel, but that's totally fine. Just pull it down enough so both sides line up and stitch that bottom edge. Again, I'm using a serger so it cleans up the bottom edge, and I'm also sewing on the inside of that gap. If you don't have a serger, it's totally fine, you can use a straight stitch. Now that we have both of the panels connected at the bottom edge, we're going to pull down the back panel. We'll be turning that entire back panel into a front pouch pocket, and you can also pull it down further if you're trying to make this section longer. It really depends on the placement of your pockets. I'm trying to keep them within the design, so I don't want to pull the back panel down any further than the bottom pockets. The top of the front panel will be about at waist level, so if you want to hold it up to yourself and make adjustments, that's probably the best way to go, because you don't want to make it too long or too short. Once you found that sweet spot, we're going to move to the side edges of the back panel and roll them under once. And essentially all we're doing is just hemming those side edges, and at the bottom we're going to tuck the extra fabric inwards so it's a nice clean edge. The goal is to get the back panel lined up with the front panel and no raw edges showing. so you may need to move the fabric around a little bit to get it lined up perfectly. Place a few pins and do the same exact thing to the opposite side of the back panel. Once you have all your pins in place, we're going to start the stitch at the top corner, go down the side, along the bottom, and back up the opposite side. This stitch can get a little bit bulky, so I recommend using a heavier white needle and just taking your time going over the seams. But after you finish up the stitch, you'll start to see that the bottom section is coming together, and this is going to be one large pocket with 2 pockets on the front. Now you can add a stitch directly down the center to make a divider, but for this video, I'm just going to keep it as one large pocket. And it's probably best to quickly hold it up to your waist just to get an idea of the height, because you can always dethread it, make adjustments, and sew it again. But for the moment, we can place this section off to the side and grab both of the pant leg panels. Rotate the panel so you have the side seams facing up. And this will be the seam that does not have the double stitching. If you have double stitching on both seams, then you can pick either one. Since I'm not utilizing the seam, I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut directly down it. After cutting, open up both of the panels and lay them out flat. And essentially what we did was just create a larger surface area of fabric to work with. And what we're going to be doing is using these 2 panels to create the top section and the pocket. To show the process a little bit better, I'm going to take one panel over to the dress form. The first thing you want to do is figure out the height of your apron, and then we're going to take that inseam and place it directly in the center of the dress form. Mine's going to go all the way up to the bottom of the neck, then I'm going to grab the bottom section and place it at waist level. You can also make adjustments to make it longer or shorter. You should have enough material to make it to your exact height. Once you have everything lined up in the center, then we're going to move to the top section and roll the outside edges inward. These will be on an angle because you want them to taper off to match the width of the bottom section. You also want it to be wide enough on top, so make any adjustments to match your measurements. Once you have it dialed in, we're going to mark the entire edge for both sides. And this marking is going to be a fold line to create the hem, so I recommend using pencil or chalk. Then we're going to make one more mark along the waistband of the bottom section. I still have it pinned together so you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like after it's sewn together and also sitting on a flat surface. At this point, it's best to make any adjustments to that top section if needed, whether that's height or width. You mainly just want to make sure the bottom matches the width of the top section. Once you're satisfied with the overall dimensions and fit, we're going to unpin the bottom section, place it off to the side, and begin to finish up the top section. I don't want to cut directly on my markings, especially for the sides, because we're going to be rolling that edge over, so I'm going to add a little bit of seam allowance to the bottom edge and also the sides. And it's probably best to add about a 1/2 inch to the seam allowance. Then go ahead and trim it on the seam allowance. Before we hem the sides, we want to first clean up the raw edges, so we're going to serge the sides and the bottom edge. Again, if you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch. Or if you want to skip this step, you can totally do that too. But now that we have the edges cleaned up, we're going to start by hemming the sides. So locate your initial markings and fold directly on that spot. Since I added a 1/2 inch of seam allowance, there should be a 1/2 inch folded under the back. Place a few pins to keep the hem lined up and then add a top stitch to both sides. This stitch will be very noticeable, so try to make it as neat as possible. After finishing up the stitch, double check both sides, make sure everything is looking nice and neat. If everything is looking good, we're going to grab the bottom section and check to see if the bottom edge of the top section lines up with the waistband of the bottom section. If you need to dethread the sides of the top section and readjust it to match the width of the bottom section, you can do that in this step. But anyways, we're going to line the bottom section up with the initial marking on the top section and stitch directly on top of the waistband stitch. And for this stitch, you may need to skip over the belt loops and the button. I was able to sew right alongside of them, but it really depends on the layout of your pants. And at this point, we have the basic layout for our apron. If you don't want to add any more pockets to the top section, you can totally skip the next step. But for this next step, we're going to be adding one more pocket using the second leg panel. And you can make this pocket to any size. I'm making mine fairly large to fill up the top section. I'm also going to be utilizing the inseam, lining that up in the center, and also the hem at the top edge. So from here, you want to determine the width and the height of your pocket. After marking it out with chalk, we're going to do the same thing with the top section, add a little bit of seam allowance, and make your cut. With the pocket cut, we're going to grab the apron and place it on the top section. Roll the side and bottom edges under so you have nice clean edges. Those edges will want to pop out, so you want to place a few pins. And from here, we're going to stitch the side, bottom, and back up the opposite side. I'm also going to be making one more stitch along the side to create a pencil holder. This is optional, I just wanted to throw it in there because it's a very easy feature to add. This is the only pocket I will be adding. You can use the rest of the fabric to add more pockets if you would like. And as far as the pencil holder, you can make adjustments to this to have it fit other items like markers, pens, or even brushes. You can also easily add more than one. But anyways, moving on to the next step, we'll be adding eyelets so we can attach the strap. I'll be using a larger size eyelet because I'm going to be sliding the webbing through these eyelets, so I want them to be on the bigger side. Anything over a 1/2 inch should work great. and I'll be adding them in the top corners and the top of the pockets. The eyelets I'm using came with a hole punch that matches the diameter of the eyelet. This will ensure I make the right size opening for the eyelets. If yours didn't come with the punch, you can just use scissors instead. From here, we're going to place the top section of the eyelet on the right side and the backing on the back. This eyelet kit also came with a hammer die. You can also use pliers or a press. But the hammer die is super easy to use. All you have to do is place the base on the right side of the eyelet, slide the die portion into the back, and then hammer it to secure it down. And you don't need to use a lot of force. Then go ahead and repeat this for the other eyelet openings. And just like that, your eyelets are ready to go. If you are using a lighter weight fabric, I do recommend using a backing on the back side of the eyelet so the eyelets don't rip out of the fabric. The next thing you want to do is locate a lobster clasp or clip that works good with your eyelet. And by this I mean that the opening on the clip is large enough so it fits over the fabric and through the eyelet. And you mainly want to make sure it has enough space to move around. And to complete the strap, you'll only need 2 of these clips. So for this next step, we can place the apron off to the side and cut 2 2-yard strips of webbing. And you can actually cut these longer than 2 yards and trim them down in later steps. I'm also using a 1-inch webbing. It is on the larger side, so if you can find something smaller than 1 inch, you should be doing good. From here, we're going to move to one end of the webbing and feed that webbing end through the lobster clasp opening. Roll the webbing end over once so you have a nice clean edge and place a pin. Then go ahead and repeat this process for the second lobster clasp and webbing end. Grab the opposite end of the webbing and roll the end over twice so you have a nice clean edge. Repeat this process for both of the webbing ends. Once all the pins are in place, we're going to add a tack stitch to each one of the rolled over ends. Feel free to add a box stitch for extra strength. These will be taking the most strain, so you want to secure them down as best as possible. And before you make any adjustments to the length, we're going to add one more component so that way you can try it on and see how it fits. This component is a little piece of leather or fabric that has 4 openings so the webbing can slide through. It's going to allow the straps to cross in the back and make sure they're not flopping around. You want to feed the webbing straps through the opening so they cross in the middle. And this is a crossback apron we're making. If you're not trying to make a crossback, you don't need to add this component. You can switch up the strap configuration to make it more of a tie-back apron. But anyways, moving on to the next step, we're going to grab the apron, clip the clasp to the top eyelets, and as you can see, the straps move in a diagonal, so we're going to feed the closest one into the closest eyelet. The 1-inch webbing is a little bit large for this size eyelet, but it can be fixed if you use a larger eyelet. The fun thing about this design is that if you cut your straps long enough, you can actually wrap them around the front within the belt loops and then tie them off behind you. But you do need to cut these a little bit longer, but it does add a cool feature and look to the overall apron. I'm just going to keep it standard so they tie back behind me without looping around the front. Moving into the final step, that's adding your branding. I use leather strips added with double-sided rivets. I also folded one in half, added a D-ring so I have something I can clip things to. There's a lot of possibilities when it comes to the overall branding. You can use leather strips like I did, you can use embroidery, or you can even screen print. The finished apron does have a lot of pockets. You have the big pocket at the bottom, you have the 2 on the outside of that pocket, you have the 2 main pockets, and you have your 1 large pocket up top. And there's so many more pocket configurations you can come up with. I just wanted to give you the basic layout and foundation, and you can build from there. So have some fun with it, get creative, and make an apron that's really gonna work for you. And there you have it, your new denim apron is complete. Hopefully yours turned out just as good. There's so many different ways you can do the pockets, you can change up the size, and add custom features that work best for you. Like always, I wanna see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at ProperFitClothing, and until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.